I cannot minimize. Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon. Let's get started here. All right. So welcome to the series on women in Torah. I'm glad to have you here. This is the first this is the second time I've taught this series. I've decided in this time to do a 4-part, and if we want to continue, we can add on lots of other women from our Torah, from our history. But I thought it was important to start with the 4 matriarchs of the Jewish people. So Sarah is the first Jewish woman and the first woman we are going to look into. So thank you for being here. Why isn't this work? This happens to me every time. There. So Nachmanides, the Ramban, quotes a very well-known verse that says the events of the ancestors are a predestined sign for their descendants. So what happens to our ancestors gives us knowledge and information about what's going to happen in the future. This is especially true for the first book of the Torah, the book of Bereshit, or in English, the book of Genesis, which really means the book of creation, where we are first introduced to God creating the world and the creation of humanity. But really the focus of creation, once we get beyond the first few chapters, is the introduction of the Jewish people into humanity and into the world. And we're introduced to the patriarchs and matriarchs in a way that we see not everything about their lives, but we see, I would say, the highlights and the lowlights, right? The important events that happen in their lives that are going to teach us everything we need to get through life just by studying their lives. So by studying Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebecca and Rivka and Jacob and Leah and Rachel, plus the siblings and the cousins and the other characters that are, in the book of Genesis, we're actually told that we will learn everything that we need for the rest of the future of humanity based on their struggles, based on their successes, and it will help us learn how we can manage in our lives, even though we could be 4,000 years further in the future. So we will never understand everything that there is in this world, but we can use their experiences, we can look at their personalities, their character traits, we can look at the struggles and challenges that they went through, especially for the Jewish women, and use that as a springboard for what we need to know now. The lives of these women are like a mirror for our own lives today. So when we learn about the different women, and I'm going to refer to different sources in Torah, but I'm also going to refer to deeper understandings of the Torah itself that's found in the oral Torah, like the Talmud, the Gemara, the Mishnah. I'll even quote a Midrash tonight. And most of the sources that I created when I made this series, I used 2 main sources talking about Jewish women. One is called it's a book called Mirror of Our Lives by Holly Pavlov. And the second is a Women in Torah series by Dina Coopersmith. I wanted to do this course on Jewish women, and again, this is my second time doing it, because as Jewish women, we have unique roles to play for all of the Jewish people, in all of our families, in our communities. We really are the ones who are responsible for the future of the Jewish nation. Biologically, that makes sense. But also, if we look at our history, we see how the Jewish women forged us forward from one generation to the next. And the future of the Jewish people is essentially in our hands. So by delving into the characters and the lifetimes of these women, I hope we'll be able to incorporate some of the lessons that we learn and incorporate it into our lives in order to propel us further in our journey, in our families, in our communities. So why is the book of creation, or the book of Genesis, the book of creation, so to speak? Like, why is it named creation? Any ideas? Okay, so one of the more obvious answers is that the creation story of God creating the universe and creating human beings, creating everything, is right from the beginning, Bereshit meaning from the beginning, in the story of Genesis, of from the beginning. But also because the creation of the patriarchs and matriarchs really tells us what is going to come in the world. Their DNA, okay, their genetic makeup sets the genetic makeup for their descendants. So if we think about this in like a spiritual way, when it comes to our personalities and our character traits, they're setting the creation of their future line of descendants after them. So what do I mean by that? So let's use like Esav, for example, the brother of Jacob, one of the twins, son of Isaac and Rivka. Esav's future descendants, one line of his descendants becomes the future Roman Empire. And when we look at Esav's personality, his character traits, his behavior, his struggles, his challenges, the way he treats his brother Jacob, the relationship between the two of them, we see that play out in the relationship between the Roman Empire and the Jewish people in ancient civilization. We see that the DNA of Esav is implanted in the character and behavior of the Roman Empire and the way it behaves, same with Jacob, that his DNA and character and the relationship between the two plays out for generations and generations. Okay? Another example is someone like Ishmael. Ishmael is the son of Sarah and Avraham, of Avraham, the brother of Isaac, half-brother, brothers from another mother, okay? And Ishmael's descendants become the Arab empires, and more specifically, the line of Islam comes from Muhammad, who was a descendant of Ishmael. And we see the character, the personality, the struggles, the positives and the negatives of Ishmael, and how that plays out in his relationship with his brother Isaac, plays out for all of history. So when I say that the genes, the genetics, the DNA of the world are in the book of Genesis, we also mean that it's implanted spiritually in these patriarchs and matriarchs and in the genetic makeup of these people who we will see it go further. Is that making sense a little bit? Okay. So just keep that in mind when we look at, we're going to look at Sarah tonight, Sarah, and her personality and her struggles and the way that she handles things is really implanted in the DNA of the Jewish woman. Sometimes we might ask ourselves, like, why is it that as Jewish women, we're always looking at this way, and we're always, pushing ahead, forging forward, or we have certain character traits about ourselves? It's because it's implanted in us all the way back from Sarah. Okay? So let's talk about names for a minute, because when we talk about names, we understand in the Jewish world that names have meaning. And with Sarah specifically, her original name was not Sarah. Some of you might know this already. Her name was actually Sarai. And Avraham was really Avram or Abram without the hey, okay? So at a certain point in their journey, God renames them Avraham and Sarah. All right. Why do they get an extra hey in their name? Because hey is the letter of God. It's the letter of God. God is inserting himself, so to speak, into their name because they're bringing God into the world. Right? Abraham and Sarah have a specific mission, and their mission together is to change the world, to change humanity's view of the world, and to bring God into this world. That God is not up in the sky watching the show, but God is interacting in this world every moment. And their mission was to teach this to humanity. Okay, so to look at the world through like our God lenses or our God goggles, whatever you want to call them. So Sarah had a unique mission, and when her name got changed to Sarah from Sarai, the mission was like secured. Okay. But it's interesting when we think about a name. I don't know if everyone knows this. I think it's important to understand is that our names, if you have a Hebrew name, our names are very important to who we actually are, meaning who we are in our essence, our soul. When parents name a child, the Torah tells us that parents have a level of prophecy when they are naming their child in Hebrew. And the name that we are given is meant to be, so to speak, with divine intervention. And it, for whatever reason, which we may or may not understand, is connected to the essence of who we are, our character, our personality, our mission in this world. In the Ashkenazi tradition, which I think we're all on that team over here on this class, we generally are named after someone who's passed away that we are related to. There could be that there's a connection, we believe, with our soul and that soul, and our mission and their mission. So maybe some homework for the week, because it's fun homework, is do a little research on the meaning of your Hebrew name, if you know it, who you're named after, if you know that, and see if it works. See if the description or the translation of what your name means or who it's attached to in the Torah, but also in like your ancestry, and how does that connect to you as a person? Because we're told that there is 100% connection, and it's divinely assigned to you. So when Sarah's name is changed, and we don't change names in Judaism unless it's an extreme situation, by the way. There is the tradition to change a child's or a person's name or add on to their name if somebody is, God forbid, very, very sick, with names that represent long life, like Chaya, or in Yiddish, Alta, if you know any Altas. So that there's like a change in their divine future. Is that making sense? By adding a name representing life, you're changing the muzzle, so to speak. You're changing the muzzle of the person. So there is this concept that our name is really tied to our destiny. So when Sarah's name is changed, her name is changed from saying my princess or my leader or my mother to the princess, the leader, the mother. Meaning she's not just a woman for herself anymore. She now is on the mission to be the mother of all nations, to be the princess, the queen of the people. That she is going to lead humanity in the quest of bringing God and holiness to this world, morals and ethics, how to treat our neighbors, how to give charity, how to invite people into our homes, all of these concepts that we take for granted today in 2025, in the society that they were living in, it was not such an ethical society. And for Sarah and Abraham to go on their mission, they were taking on the role of leader of the nations. Any questions? Okay. So the Torah describes Sarai and then Sarah, when her name changes, as being barren. So maybe I gave it away too fast on the slide here. But Sarah is not the only of the matriarchs that is barren, that is not able to have children for the majority of her life. Her daughter-in-law, Rivka, will have the same challenge. Her granddaughters, Rachel and Leah, will have the same challenge. There are many righteous women in the Torah who will have challenges with fertility. So one question we should be asking ourselves is why? Why Sarah, if she is such a matriarch and she's going to be she is the first Jewish woman, the first woman to go on this holy mission of bringing morals and ethics into society, and she's going to be the mother of the people. How could she be the mother of the people if she can't have a baby? And why that challenge? Why is God giving her this challenge? Because it almost seems like that's the biggest struggle for someone who's supposed to be a mother, to not be able to have her own child? Any ideas? Why are the matriarchs described as barren? Like really almost with no womb, like no possibility of having a baby. Any ideas? Okay. So we learn from the matriarchs, from Sarah specifically, right at the beginning of the Jewish story, that God gives us needs in order for us to turn to God for blessings and to develop a relationship with God. If we got everything that we wanted, if we thought about something and then it appeared and it happened and it always worked out for us, right? We would not see God in the world so clearly. If we think about it, most people speak to God, see God, think about God when things are not going so well. But when things are going well, we forget about God. If we think about the parent-child relationship, I was thinking about this before. If a parent gives their child everything, and the child knows that whatever they want, the parent's going to just shower it down on them, is that creating a meaningful, deep relationship between the parent and the child? So it's not, because the child's getting whatever they want. They take the parent for granted. There isn't this deep connection between the two. It would be more of a surface level connection. Only when a child needs to turn to their parent and the parent is tasked with working hard to give something to the child does a deeper, meaningful relationship build and a trust build between the two. So if we got whatever we wanted instantaneously and directly, we wouldn't really develop a connection with God in the same way. But if we have needs that are left unmet, and they could be unfulfilled for a short time, for a longer time, for some people it could be unfulfilled for their entire physical lifetime, then we are now challenged to do our best in that situation. And in the challenging situation, our struggle is to look to God and build a relationship, even though we did not get what we thought we deserved or we wanted. And the challenge of the Jewish people and all of humanity really is to see that even though we're not getting what we want or what we think we need, that it is for our best. It's a hard challenge. But it's working on these trust muscles and this God relationship, okay, that can only really be created when we have challenges. So Sarah, with her clarity and wisdom, and she was on a spiritual, very high level, understood that she must have work to do if she is not getting the child that God had promised to them. You will be the mother of all the nations. So she worked very, very hard on her relationship with God for 90 years. Okay, they lived longer then, but Sarah actually lived till 127, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But she had to develop a very strong sense of her inner belief and trust in God. Someone who, God forbid, is having trouble with pregnancy, a woman, that is a very difficult thing for a woman to go through. And it takes a special kind of person to, in those moments and in those years, it could be a lifetime, to really trust that God has your best interest at heart and that there is a purpose for every challenge that you're going through. So Sarah was working on this her whole life. It was not an easy life for her. And when she was 90 years old, she made a decision and turned to her husband and said, look, we are on a mission. We need to bring God into this world. We need to teach humanity about monotheism and ethics and morals and values and loving our fellow person. And it can't end with us. We need to have a child. So I want you, Avraham, to have a child with Hagar, the woman who lives in their home, their maidservant, who's part of the family. and have a child with her, and we'll raise the child together in the ways that God wants us. So this is biblical surrogacy. Okay, we're going to see this again with Jacob, with multiple servants and multiple wives, that there is a mission for what will become the Jewish people, and we cannot fulfill that mission if we do not have the children to help us fulfill that mission. And therefore, Sarah humbles herself, becomes very courageous, clearly has a lot of strength, and she sacrifices herself in a way for the future of what will become, she's hoping, the Jewish people. She is determined to see through God's plan, even if it means that she is not the biological mother. She knows that it has to be done. So she sacrifices, think about Jewish women. She sacrifices herself now for the future. She sees with clarity that sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do because it's best for the next generation. This is being a Jewish woman, making those hard choices for the future good. So Abraham has a child with Hagar, and they name him Ishmael. And Ishmael will become the father of the Arab people. And in the future, we see that, there's some, we say in Yiddish, broigus, there's some issues between the Arab people and the Jewish people, and it mirrors the issues between Ishmael, and eventually they're going to have their own child, Abraham and Sarah, named Isaac, Yitzchak. So at 90 years old, at 90 years old, finally, God makes Sarah fertile, and she is given a gift of a baby of her own. So Abraham now has two children, Ishmael with Hagar, and who's older, and Isaac, the younger, baby born to parents that are 90, and Abraham was 99 years old. The Torah says, this is loosely translated here in English, but the Torah says, and God, it says here in English, took note of Sarah as he had promised, okay? And he gave Sarah a child. He did what he promised. Other translations use the word, so in Hebrew, the word is pakad, okay? So pakad could be translated as he took note. It's also more traditionally translated as God remembered Sarah. Not like God forgot about her, but God remembered the promise, saw the work she had done, saw the sacrifices she had made, and then deemed it the right time for her to have the child. So what's interesting about the word pakad is that usually when we say the word remember, or God, focused on Sarah, the word would be zachar, like zachor is to remember. So in the Torah, when there's a word that's not the generally used word, we always hone in on it. And the rabbis say, why? Why is the Torah using that word and not this word? It sounds a little different. What's the root of the word pakad? What does pakad really mean? Okay. And the Midrash explains that the use of the word pakad here means deposits. So God took note of her deposits. God saw deposits of Sarah. So what does that mean? It means that God had on deposit Sarah's mitzvahs and good deeds of all of the things that she did in her 90 years to that point of her life. So when the Torah says God remembered Sarah, we understand that it's God has said, you have deposited, think of a mitzvah, like when we put the money in the pushka, in the tzedakah box, we're making deposits. Every time a Jewish person is doing a mitzvah, a commandment, they're putting deposits into their spiritual reality and changing their future for the good. And every time Sarah put in a deposit, she's making like a bank deposit. She's saving for her retirement, her RRSPs. Okay? And God decides at 90 years old, I'm going to cash in those deposits. This is the time. Now Sarah needs the child. She has paid into her retirement fund. There is sufficient deposits. And this is the time that she needs the baby. So he takes the deposits and he gives her a child. So when a person does a mitzvah, an act of kindness, that deed belongs to us. And God is like the bank manager, and he's collecting our deeds into our bank accounts. And he guarantees that the mitzvah will be returned at the right time. So it's not necessarily, retire at 65 or your 85 factor, okay? But God will decide when the mitzvah will be kind of cashed in. In human terms, we can go to the bank anytime we want. But in God's world, he decides when we're getting our fund. And so the Torah uses the word pakad to represent this concept, that all of our good deeds do not go unnoticed. Sarah was not forgotten. She wasn't forgotten for 90 years, but she wasn't ready for the deposits to come to fruition. So Isaac is born to Sarah and Abraham. He's conceived by the way, on Rosh Hashanah. He's conceived, it's interesting, on the day of remembrance, which is Rosh Hashanah. God remembers Sarah, and she conceives on that day. And that day, Rosh Hashanah, is the day that God makes judgment on us. And Isaac is born on Pesach. So do the math for months later. Rosh Hashanah is about God judging us based on what we gave in the year before, who we were, how we behaved, what kind of mitzvahs did we deposit, what kind of transgressions did we deposit. And on Rosh Hashanah, a judgment is made. If we got our deposits or if we cashed in our deposits immediately or whenever we wanted, right, we wouldn't be able to see God's role in the world, because we would feel like, I did this, I get this, I did that, I get that. Only when things are not immediate do we look for that relationship with God, like I said before. And that's where free will really comes into play, which is also what Rosh Hashanah is all about. So we don't always see the connection. It's interesting, like Sarah's doing mitzvahs her whole life. She's on a mission of holiness, and it's 90 years till she gets a baby. Like, we don't get to see the connections all the time. So I could do mitzvahs. We all know righteous people who are like always doing mitzvahs, and they could be having a lot of tsuris, like a lot of challenges. And we know people who aren't doing so many mitzvahs who seem to have it all, and like life is easier for them. It's not so clear cut for us here on earth. And the whole purpose of that is that we have to be challenged in that way in order to choose the relationship with God. So we don't always see the reward, but we are told that we will get the reward. We might get it soon. We might get it a little later in life. We might not get it until the next world. But we are guaranteed to get that collection, the RRSP retirement fund, so to speak. The more we're plugged in and looking at connections in this world, the more we're going to see the results. So what we learn from the life and the struggles of Sarah is that we have a limited perception. We only have partial vision of what our life is supposed to look like and what our soul needs and what our mission is. But God knows our deposits. God knows our regrets. God knows our motivations. God knows our hopes and our fears and our struggles. And we can only make the best judgments we can in our situation. And in her situation, the best she could do was to tell Abraham to have a child with Hagar until it was her time, which she didn't even know was coming. And then it was her time to have a child. Another point to understand is, like, sometimes we look at people and we can make judgments on them. I mean, usually it's hard. it's our human nature to make judgments on other people. Sometimes we could look at someone and say, like, I can't believe they did that. And how are they getting this job promotion? Like, they're not nice. Or this person's, doing so many mitzvahs, and why aren't they getting this? And why is it, right? Like we tend to look at other people and make judgments because we think we know them. We think we know them, but we don't know them. We don't know what's inside, right? If someone were to look at Sarah at 90 years not having a child, she's supposed to be the mother of the world. People were making judgments on her. She must be doing something wrong. There's something wrong with her. Oh, maybe she's like, not nice in the house. Maybe she's only nice out of the house. Like, we don't know who a person is, and we don't know why they're challenged with what they are. And that's important to understand as well. Any questions? So Sarah has a baby named Isaac, Yitzchak, with her husband. And now they have the two women and Abraham and two children all living together in a house. And anyone that's been part of a blended family probably can relate to this. There's a lot of challenges. We have different ways the women might want to raise their sons. We have different character traits and DNA in those boys. And it's getting difficult as Ishmael and Isaac are getting older. As Ishmael actually turns 13, Sarah puts her foot down because she sees that Ishmael is not acting in a moral way. Ishmael has positives about him. He's not a horrible human being. He is very much respectful of his father. He has a very strong connection with God, but he's lying and he's not treating his brother well. And he's acting in a way that Sarah, with her insight and intuition, sees that this is going to go down not a great path. If we look at Ishmael's descendants, we see these traits. We see a respect for the father. We see a strong relationship with God. But we see the relationship between the Arab Islamic people and the Jewish people is not healthy. It's not a healthy relationship in a home. And Sarah does something she makes a strong statement, a very difficult decision. Again, another difficult decision. She says to her husband, Ishmael and his mother must leave the house. This is not working. This is a bad influence on our son. And if we want to influence the world with holiness, it's not going to happen if Ishmael and Hagar live in this house. Now, Abraham loves his son. He loves Ishmael. It's his firstborn son. What kind of a father looks at the other mother and just says, no problem, honey, whatever you want? That's difficult. But God says to Abraham, do whatever Sarah tells you. Everybody go tell your husband. Do whatever Sarah says. God says to Abraham, listen to your wife. I should print this part of the Torah, blow it up, and put it on the wall. Listen to your wife. Why? Because a woman, has something called bina, which is a deep intuition, clarity, and understanding. It's a spiritual insight to see what is good and what is not good for the far-reaching future, like I spoke about before. A woman has this ability to see beyond the immediate. And so God says to Abraham, listen to the woman. Listen to your wife. He confirms for Abraham that Sarah is right, even though it's a horrible decision to make, to kick a child out of their home, so to speak. To remove a child from the home is a horrible decision a woman has to make. But she understands the danger of them staying in the home. So the next lesson we learn is a man should listen to his wife and understand that the woman has the family unit's best interest at heart. And when God confirms this for Abraham, he listens to his wife, and therefore they're able to raise Isaac in the ways of God, so to speak, with holiness, so that Isaac will play out the crucial role that he will have with his wife, Rivka, who we'll talk about next week, to ensure that there will be morality the way that God intended it to be in this world, and to continue what will become the Jewish people. So Sarah's life is actually not very detailed in the Torah. We know, though, that Sarah was 127 years old when she died. Her death is mentioned right after, immediately after, the binding of Isaac, when Abraham takes Isaac to sacrifice him on the altar, and then it gets replaced with the ram, without going into that whole story. Her death is mentioned immediately after that event. So there are a few versions of the way that she died. We know that she died immediately at that moment, and Isaac is not sacrificed, Isaac lives. It's for sure that she dies, and her death is tied to the binding of Isaac. So most of the sages and the Torah scholars say that she experienced like this minuscule, quick amount of doubt and confusion when she heard that Isaac was going to be sacrificed. That she had this little second of a lack of trust in God, and that her evil inclination, like her Yetzer Hara, she was being tested, and in that moment, she died. The other sages tell us that she died of shock and sorrow, similar, because she's told that at the thought, we're told that at the thought of Isaac dying, or almost dying, she was so overwhelmed that she herself died. Either way, what we can conclude about Sarah is that, and she lived to more than 120, that she completed her mission in the world. She had such clarity and insight in moving her family in the direction it needed, that in that final moment, it's almost like she couldn't bear it anymore. Like she had hit her wall, so to speak. The Torah, or the Midrash, says that she screamed 6 times, corresponding to the 6 tekiah notes of the shofar. Here we have Rosh Hashanah again, the ram's horn, the binding of Isaac, the shofar. You know, the tekiah, that she screamed 6 times in the way that the tekiah notes are blasted. And that she had not even finished the tekiah, and she died in that moment. Her wails were like the tekiah that we hear from the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah. When we blow that shofar, it's our soul like reaching to God in this like way of us praying for good, right? For ourselves. It reminds us also, we read the story of the binding of Isaac on Rosh Hashanah, and also it reminds us of Mount Sinai, when the shofar was blown at Mount Sinai for all of the nation to hear. And eventually we will hear the shofar when the Mashiach comes. And so when we hear the shofar every year on Rosh Hashanah, we're remembering Sarah in that moment. And we're processing to, like, for ourselves, that we don't want to be confused. We want clarity in this world. We want to be able to see the future clearly for our families. And we want to have this role and mission and get connected to what that is. So Sarah is buried, Abraham buries her in Israel, in Hebron, in the what is called the Cave of Machpelah. You can go there today and visit. And that's where Abraham and Sarah are buried. That's where Isaac and Rebekah are buried, and Jacob and Leah are buried. We'll talk about in the next few weeks. And she's described again as living 127 years old. So why 127? Where is that number and what does that mean? So Rashi comments that when she was 100, she was like a 20-year-old in terms of sin, because it's interesting the way the Torah describes it to 100, and the way that she's described her life. It says Sarah's lifetime, the span of her life, came to 127 years. Nobody else, his death or age is described in this way at all in the Torah. So Rashi comments that when she was 100, she was like a 20-year-old in terms of her sin. I'll explain. Okay, so what does that mean? A 20-year-old, we're told, but the Torah tells us, when a child has bar mitzvah, they become responsible for their own actions, right? That's part of growing up and becoming an adult. You're taking on your own mitzvahs. But it's in actuality, it's a 20-year-old that really is 100% responsible for their actions. Between 13 and 20, there's still some wiggle room that your parents are still responsible. But at 20 years old, that's it. If you make a transgression, your neshama, your soul, is responsible for that transgression. 20 years old is the cutoff. So Rashi is saying that at 100, she was like a 20-year-old, meaning she was clean of sin at 100 years old. She was like a youthful 20-year-old. And when she was 20, the Midrash says that she was like a 7-year-old in terms of her beauty, in terms of her innocence. So when it's described that she was 127 years old, what Rashi is commenting on is that the Midrash is teaching us that she was sinless and beautiful and innocent her whole life. Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, a great Torah scholar, explains further that the description of her years also tells us, the way that it says the span of her life, that the years of her life were all equal for good. So she didn't do what all of us go through, which is we experience childhood, then we experience adulthood, and then we experience, God willing, old age, like in different stages of life. Sarah was great in all of those years. At every point in her life, on every single day, she was as innocent as a child, she was as strong and determined as a 20-year-old, and she was as wise as an old lady. A 7-year-old, if we think about a child, is innocent. A 7-year-old doesn't have cynicism, especially when it comes to connection with God and prayer. Children have this like innate spiritual innocence to them, that they really are connected to God in a way that once we hit bar mitzvah and adulthood, the cynicism starts to seep in, right? The struggle starts to seep in. But Sarah always felt that way, like a child. And a 20-year-old feels like, think of all the university students today, feels like they can change the world. A 20-year-old has no fear. I can do anything, right? I can do anything. There's no limits to what I can do. Sarah never felt limited. She always felt like a 20-year-old in that way. And a 100-year-old has wisdom and perspective. And Sarah always had this as well. It is for all of these reasons that she is the Jewish mother. She is the first Jewish woman. That's a pretty high bar to reach. So Rebbetzin Ivy Kalazan wrote a class on Sarah being a woman of valor. So this is what's interesting about Sarah's at the end of her life. Avraham, after she dies, pays 400 gold coins, this is in the Torah, to purchase the burial plot, the cave of Machpelah, in order to bury his wife. There is so much detail in him purchasing this land, negotiating for the land. Like literally, it's like he's at the shuk, he's at the market in Jerusalem, back and forth with the price. And it's described in so much detail in the Parsha about Sarah, more than her death is described. More than anyone else in the Torah, they don't have a description of their death and their burial like Sarah. It's like her death is a major issue. At her funeral, Avraham says her eulogy. And the eulogy that he says is the poem that men read to their wives every Friday night. In English, it's called Woman of Valor. In Hebrew, it's called Eshes Chayil. And every Friday night, a Jewish man should be reading this poem to his Jewish wife. So one of the verses, I'm going to focus on one, in the Eshes Chayil poem, song, it says, a man says this to his wife. It's funny, sometimes when we're with friends and I'm at a Shabbos table and the husband is saying it to his wife, like we always laugh at certain lines because it just sounds so funny in 2025. But he says, she repays his good, but never his harm all the days of his life. And then it says, I always find this funny, but we're going to delve into the meaning of it. She seeks out wool and linen, and her hands work willingly. Right? So in 2025, we've gone through the movement of feminism, and it's the husband saying to the wife, you seek out wool and linen, and your hands work willingly. What does this mean? So there is a commandment in the Torah, one of the mitzvahs, called shatnez, which is that wool and linen, I don't know if you guys know this, but wool and linen cannot be worn together. So when someone goes and they purchase a new suit or a sweater or pants, someone who is conscious of this mitzvah will have their clothing checked to make sure that there are no wool and linen threads in the same garment. So there's a whole process. People are trained how to check for wool and linen. So what is this about? She seeks out wool and linen. So what this is about is exactly what Sarah had to do in her home. She knew that there were two things in her home, two people in her home that did not belong together. Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael had very good things about him. He had a bris. He had a mother that wanted to cling to Abraham's way of life. He was very connected to God. He cries out to God for help, Ishmael, in his life, and that actually redeems him back into the home later. But he has other sins. He idol worships. He's a little bit of a trickster. He's not treating his brother well. And Sarah sees beyond this. She sees that if they remained together, the influence spiritually would not go in the right direction. So she has this instinct to seek out wool and linen. And she works hard to figure out with clarity what the issue is. What she does is she's trying to create the future generation, as I said, of bringing morals and ethics into the world. She's trying to correct the mistakes of Adam and Eve. All of the Jewish generations are basically doing this. And why does Abraham have to spend 400 gold coins? He gets he overpays. He gets finagled. He overpays for the plot of land. Why is he so intent on this burial plot? Because this is the location where Adam and Eve are buried. And Abraham understands that Sarah corrected Eve's mistakes, and she was able to separate out the good from the bad. And therefore, he must have Sarah buried in this plot. And this is why the cave of Machpelah, it's in Hebron. Some of you might have visited it. Why it is so crucial and why there is so much energy and monetary investment into Abraham securing this land. On another note, historically, Abraham purchases this land almost 4,000 years ago. So there's some Torah evidence for the Jewish people's connection to the land as well. The next person who is going to work on distinguishing good versus bad, separating wool from linen, is going to be the daughter-in-law, Rivka, when she has twin boys that are going to challenge her greatly. And we'll discuss that next week. So the lessons from Sarah, her main character trait that she gives to the Jewish women through her DNA, so to speak, is she has a trust in Hashem when she's going through challenge after challenge. She handles challenges with humility and courage and strength. She understands to look to Hashem. She doesn't make judgments, right? We learn from her not to make judgments, sorry. We learn from her that every mitzvah we do is like a bank deposit, that eventually we will see the results. And we learn to live every day to the fullest. Every single day should be filled with goodness. And it will help us with clarity see right from wrong and choose right. And this is the kind of woman that she was. And we needed a woman like this to literally change the world. Her and Abraham change the world because they bring the understanding of good versus bad. They bring the understanding of God and holiness. They'll teach it to their children. It will take a few generations for it to kind of be more secured and build roots in the ground. But it starts with her, and it starts with Abraham. And that's what makes her so special. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
I'm just going to stop.